power doesn't always announce itself with a badge. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and stays completely silent while you make the biggest mistake of your life. When Officer Grant Harlan delivered a stinging slap across the face of an unidentified black woman demanding accountability in his precinct lobby, he thought he was simply putting another civilian in her place. He had no idea the woman wiping blood from her lip was Captain Naomi Brooks, the new precinct captain sent to clean house. Rain lashed against the windshield of the unassuming gray sedan as it idled half a block away from the 54th precinct in downtown Oakhaven. Inside, Naomi Brooks sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. At 42, Naomi possessed a quiet, unyielding intensity that had earned her a fearsome reputation during her 15 years in Chicago's Internal Affairs Division. She had dismantled corruption rings, put crooked cops behind bars, and navigated the treacherous political waters of a major metropolitan police force. Now she was here. The mayor of Oakhaven had personally requested her transfer, promising her full autonomy to gut the 54th precinct, a notoriously corrupt and dysfunctional district that had been bleeding the city dry through lawsuits and sheer incompetence. Her official introduction as the new precinct captain wasn't scheduled until the morning roll call. The outgoing captain had supposedly retired abruptly under a cloud of suspicion, leaving a leadership vacuum that the rank and file had enthusiastically exploited. Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison had warned her that the men and women of the 54th were a tightly knit, hostile fraternity. They did not take kindly to outsiders, and they certainly wouldn't roll out the red carpet for a black woman coming in to disrupt their deeply ingrained toxic culture. Instead of showing up in her dress blues, surrounded by brass and fanfare, Naomi had chosen a different approach. She wore a sharp, charcoal gray trench coat over a simple black turtleneck and slacks. No badge, no weapon visible, just a citizen walking into a public building. She wanted to see how her officers behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. Stepping out into the biting November chill, Naomi pulled her collar up against the wind and walked briskly toward the precinct. The building itself looked tired, its brick facade stained with decades of city grime. Pushing through the heavy glass double doors, she was immediately hit by the stale, unmistakable odor of cheap institutional coffee, floor wax, and unwashed bodies. The lobby was sparsely populated, but humming with low, anxious energy. A few civilians sat on hard plastic chairs, looking exhausted and defeated. Behind the thick, bullet-resistant glass of the front desk sat Sergeant Floyd Grayson, a heavy-set man aggressively ignoring the elderly woman standing directly in front of him. Naomi took a position near a bulletin board plastered with outdated community notices, pretending to read a flyer while keeping her eyes and ears entirely focused on the room. "Excuse me, officer," the elderly woman pleaded, her voice trembling. "I've been waiting for hours. My grandson hasn't come home, and I just want to file a missing persons report." Grayson didn't even look up from his smartphone. "Like I told you earlier, Mrs. Whitaker, he's probably just sleeping off a bender. We don't file on adults until it's been 48 hours. Go home." Before Mrs. Whitaker could protest further, the heavy security door leading to the back offices swung open, and two patrol officers swaggered into the lobby. They were holding steaming cups of coffee and laughing loudly. Naomi's sharp eyes immediately cataloged their details. Officer Grant Harlan, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped haircut, and a sneer that seemed permanently etched into his features. Beside him was Officer Cole Brennan, slightly shorter, his uniform visibly unkempt. They possessed the arrogant, relaxed posture of men who believed they owned the building and everyone in it. "Hey, Sarge," Harlan called out, leaning against the front desk and completely blocking Mrs. Whitaker. "Did you catch the game last night? absolute massacre. "Move aside," Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice finding a desperate sliver of strength. "I was talking to him." Harlan paused mid-sip, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the diminutive woman. "Excuse me, are you telling me how to do my job in my own precinct, Grandma?" "I just want to report my grandson missing," she stammered, intimidated by his sudden aggression. "And Sarge told you to beat it," Brennan chimed in, chuckling. "Take a hint, lady. We aren't your personal babysitting service." Naomi felt a familiar, icy anger bloom in her chest. This was exactly the kind of rot she had been sent to excise. It wasn't just incompetence. It was active, malicious disdain for the community they were sworn to protect. She stepped away from the bulletin board and walked calmly across the linoleum floor, her heels clicking with deliberate precision. "Actually, gentlemen," Naomi said, her voice smooth, but carrying a resonant authority that demanded the room's attention. "Department policy dictates that a missing persons report can be filed immediately if the subject is considered vulnerable or if the disappearance is highly uncharacteristic. Given that you haven't even taken her grandson's name, you have no way of knowing either." Silence fell over the lobby. Sergeant Grayson finally looked up from his phone. Harlan slowly turned around, his eyes raking over Naomi from head to toe, assessing her. He saw a civilian, a black woman in a nice coat, who dared to quote policy at him. A condescending smirk spread across his face. "Well, look what we have here," Harlan sneered, stepping away from the desk and closing the distance between them. "A regular legal scholar. Who the hell are you? The mayor's new diversity hire for the complaint department." "I'm someone who expects officers in uniform to do the job the taxpayers fund them to do," Naomi replied, not breaking eye contact, not stepping back an inch. Brennan snorted in the background. "Oh, she's feisty, Grant. Better watch out." Harlan stepped closer, invading Naomi's personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and stale tobacco radiated off him. "Listen to me very carefully, lady. You walk in here, you start yapping about policy, you start disrespecting my uniform. That's a good way to find yourself sitting in a holding cell for disorderly conduct. Now turn around, walk out those doors, and mind your own damn business." "Your badge number is 4492, Naomi stated calmly, looking pointedly at the silver shield on his chest. "Officer Harlan. And yours is 5103, Officer Brennan. You are both actively violating the department's code of conduct regarding civilian interactions." Harlan's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a raw, unhinged fury. He was not used to being challenged, let alone humiliated in his own lobby by someone he deemed completely powerless. "Shut your mouth," Harlan barked, raising his hand. "Are you going to make me?" Naomi challenged softly. The slap echoed through the quiet lobby like a gunshot. Pain flared across Naomi's left cheek, hot and sudden. The sheer force of Grant Harlan's backhand snapped her head to the side, dislodging a gold hoop earring that clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor. The metallic bouncing sound was the only noise in the room. For a terrifying, breathless moment, the entire precinct lobby froze. Mrs. Whitaker gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth in horror. Behind the thick glass, Sergeant Grayson half stood from his chair, his eyes wide, but he made absolutely no move to intervene or hit the panic button. Naomi slowly turned her head back to face Harlan. She didn't raise her hand to her stinging cheek. She didn't stumble. She simply let her tongue run along the inside of her lower lip, tasting the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. When her eyes locked onto Harlan's again, there was no fear in them. There wasn't even anger anymore. Instead, there was a cold, calculating emptiness that for a fleeting second made the burly officer hesitate. But Harlan's ego was far too fragile. and his audience was watching. He couldn't back down now. He misinterpreted her silence for shock, her stillness for submission. "I told you to shut your mouth," Harlan snarled. Though his voice wavered imperceptibly, he pointed a thick finger at her face. "You want to come in here and cause a disturbance. You want to assault a police officer." Naomi raised an eyebrow, a chilling half-smile touching her bloody lips. "Assault? Is that what we're calling it when your hand strikes my face?" "I saw her lunge," Cole Brennan chimed in eagerly, stepping forward to back his partner up. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, revealing just how deeply the corruption ran. They covered for each other instinctively, fabricating narratives on the spot to justify their brutality. "She was acting erratic, definitively a threat. You're under arrest," Harlan declared, his confidence surging back. He grabbed Naomi's left arm, his grip bruising and unnecessarily violent, and spun her around. "On what charge?" Naomi asked, keeping her voice completely level as she allowed herself to be maneuvered. She offered no physical resistance. She knew the law, and she knew that resisting would only give them legitimate grounds for the arrest they were currently faking. "Assaulting a sworn officer, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct," Harlan listed off, yanking her arms behind her back. "We'll think of a few more by the time we finish the paperwork." Brennan pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The cold metal bit sharply into Naomi's wrists as they ratcheted the cuffs down tight, far tighter than standard procedure dictated, designed to restrict circulation and inflict pain. "Read her rights," Grant Harlan laughed, shoving her toward the heavy security door that led to the precinct's inner bowels. "You have the right to remain silent," Brennan mocked, leaning in close to Naomi's ear as he pushed her forward. "Which I highly suggest you do, unless you want to trip and fall down a flight of stairs on the way to processing. Anything you say can and will be used to make your life a living hell. Understand?" Naomi remained utterly silent. Every step they took, every threat they uttered was a nail in their professional coffins. She was committing everything to memory: the lack of intervention from the desk sergeant, the fabricated charges, the physical abuse, the intimidation tactics. They were handing her the exact justification she needed to clean house, wrapped in a neat, undeniable package. They hauled her down a long, fluorescent-lit hallway. The walls were scuffed, and the floor tiles were peeling. Naomi intentionally scanned the ceiling corners. As she suspected, the security cameras pointing down the processing corridor had their red power lights extinguished, sabotaged. It was a classic move for a precinct that routinely violated civil rights. No cameras meant no objective witnesses. "Keep moving," Harlan grunted, giving her another rough shove between her shoulder blades. They bypassed the standard booking desk entirely. There was no fingerprinting, no mugshot, no entry logged into the computer system. They were intentionally holding her off the books, a deeply illegal intimidation tactic meant to terrify a citizen into submission before releasing them hours later, with a warning to keep their mouths shut. They reached the holding area at the back of the precinct. The smell of ammonia and stale urine was overpowering. Brennan unlocked the heavy iron door of cell number 3. Harlan practically threw Naomi inside. She stumbled, but managed to keep her footing, turning around just in time to see the iron bars slam shut with a deafening clang. "Sit tight, legal scholar," Harlan smirked through the bars, tapping his nightstick against the metal. "We'll come check on you in a few hours. Maybe by then, you'll have learned how to show some respect." The two officers walked away, their laughter echoing down the concrete block hallway until the heavy reinforced door at the end clicked shut, leaving Naomi alone in the dim light. Naomi exhaled a long, steady breath. Despite the throbbing pain in her cheek and the numbness creeping into her tightly bound hands, she felt a profound sense of clarity. She surveyed her surroundings. The cell was small, containing a single metal bench bolted to the wall and an exposed toilet. Sitting on the far end of the bench was a young woman, no older than 20, clutching a thin, ragged jacket around her shoulders. She looked at Naomi with wide, terrified eyes. "They got you too," the young woman whispered, her voice shaking. Naomi walked over to the bench and carefully sat down, maintaining her rigid posture despite her bound hands. "What are you in here for?" "I don't even know," the girl choked out, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I was walking home from my shift at the diner. Officer Harlan pulled his cruiser over. He told me to get in. When I said no, he threw me in the back. Said I matched the description of a shoplifter. He's been keeping me in here for hours. He keeps coming back telling me that if I'm nice to him, he'll lose the paperwork." A dark, dangerous fire ignited in Naomi's eyes. It was one thing to be arrogant and physically abusive. It was another entirely to use a badge for predatory extortion. The rot in the 54th precinct wasn't just administrative. It was malignant. Naomi twisted her wrist slightly, testing the tension of the handcuffs. She then turned her head to look at the small digital clock mounted on the wall outside the cells. It was nearly time for roll call. Nearly time for Deputy Chief Ellison to arrive with the brass to formally introduce the new captain to the morning shift. "Don't worry," Naomi told the young woman softly, a razor-sharp edge to her tone that cut through the gloom of the cell. "Officer Harlan is going to have a very bad day." Time ticked by with agonizing slowness in the subterranean gloom of the 54th Precinct's holding area. Naomi Brooks sat perfectly still, conserving her energy while carefully committing every detail of Lila Monroe's terrifying ordeal to memory. The young woman wept softly, her thin frame shivering against the chilled concrete wall. Naomi asked gentle, probing questions, extracting the exact timeline of Harlan's predatory behavior, the specific threats he whispered, and the locations of his illegal stops. Every word was ammunition. Every tear was a guarantee that Grant Harlan's career was breathing its final ragged breaths. Upstairs, the atmosphere was entirely different. The main squad room was packed with officers milling around, sipping coffee, and trading crude jokes before the mandatory morning roll call. Grant Harlan and Cole Brennan were holding court near the briefing podium, loudly recounting their weekend exploits. Harlan stood with his chest puffed out, feeling utterly untouchable. He had just put a mouthy civilian in her place, asserting his dominance over the precinct lobby, and now he was ready to coast through another shift of doing absolutely nothing productive. "You should have seen her face," Grant Harlan chuckled, leaning against a heavily scratched wooden desk. "Thought she was some high-powered lawyer coming in to lecture us. One little slap, and she folded like a cheap lawn chair." Brennan laughed, tossing an empty sugar packet into a nearby trash can. "She was practically begging by the time we locked her up. Think we should leave her down there until lunch. Let her marinate." "Nah, we'll drag her up later. Hit her with a resisting charge and let her walk with a warning," Harlan said dismissively. "It builds character." The heavy oak doors of the squad room swung open. The casual banter died instantly as Deputy Chief Marcus Ellison strode into the room, flanked by two stone-faced internal affairs detectives and Lieutenant Dominic Raines, the shift commander. Ellison was a no-nonsense veteran with sharp gray eyes and a deep, gravelly voice that commanded immediate respect. He scanned the room, his brow furrowing when he didn't see the person he had explicitly come to introduce. "Attention on deck!" Lieutenant Raines barked. The officers scrambled to their feet, hastily straightening their uniforms and standing at parade rest. Ellison stepped up to the podium, placing a thick manila folder on the surface. He looked out at the sea of officers, his expression tight with irritation. "Settle down. We have a change in command effective immediately. As you all know, this precinct has been operating under a cloud of administrative review for months. The mayor has decided it is time for a complete overhaul. I am here this morning to introduce your new commanding officer." Ellison paused, looking toward the side door leading to the administrative offices. Nobody walked through. He frowned, pulling out his smartphone and tapping the screen. "Lieutenant Raines," Ellison said sharply. "Where is Captain Brooks?" She confirmed she would be arriving early to observe the morning shift transition. Raines looked genuinely confused. "I haven't seen her, Deputy Chief. Nobody has checked in at the front desk under that name." Ellison's eyes narrowed. He dialed a number on his phone. Somewhere deep in the precinct, buried inside the confiscated property bin behind the booking desk, Naomi's phone vibrated silently. Ellison ended the call, a deep sense of unease settling over him. Naomi Brooks was legendary for her punctuality. If she wasn't standing at this podium, something was wrong. "Sergeant Grayson," Ellison called out, spotting the desk sergeant hovering near the back of the room. "Did you log any visitors this morning? Anyone asking for me or Lieutenant Raines?" Grayson shuffled his feet nervously, his eyes darting toward Harlan. No, sir. Just the usual morning traffic. A few complaints, some loiterers. Nothing out of the ordinary." "Are you sure about that, Grayson?" Ellison asked, his voice dropping an octave. His instincts, honed over 3 decades on the force, were screaming that something was fundamentally off in this room. He noticed the slight arrogant smirk on Grant Harlan's face and immediately zeroed in on him. "Officer Harlan, you look like you have something to share." Harlan stood a little taller, completely oblivious to the trap he was walking into. "Just an eventful morning, Deputy Chief. Had a disturbed individual come into the lobby causing a massive scene. Threatened officers. Tried to assault us. We had to subdue her and put her in a holding cell to cool off." Ellison stared at him, a cold dread washing over him. "A disturbed individual. Describe her." Harlan shrugged carelessly. "Black female, early 40s. Dressed up like she thought she was somebody important. Kept quoting department policy like a textbook before she got violent. Standard crazy." The color drained entirely from Deputy Chief Ellison's face. The 2 internal affairs detectives flanking him stiffened, their hands instinctively moving closer to their duty weapons. Lieutenant Raines gasped audibly. The entire room seemed to suck in a collective, horrified breath as the reality of Harlan's words slowly dawned on the senior command staff. "You put a woman matching that description in a holding cell," Ellison said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. It wasn't a question. "Did you log her arrest? Did you process her through the system?" "Well, sir, she was resisting, so we just tossed her in cell 3 until we could do the paperwork." Brennan piped up, trying to sound professional, but failing miserably under Ellison's lethal stare. "Lieutenant Raines," Ellison ordered, not breaking eye contact with Harlan. "Take my internal affairs detail and secure the front desk. Nobody leaves this building. Nobody touches a computer. Harlan, Brennan, you're going to walk me down to the holding block right this second and pray to whatever God you believe in that the woman in cell 3 is not who I think she is." Ignorance finally gave way to a creeping, suffocating panic. Harlan's heart hammered against his ribs as he was escorted out of the squad room, the heavy, silent footsteps of the deputy chief pressing down on him like an anvil. They marched down the fluorescent-lit hallway, past the booking desk, and stopped in front of the heavy iron doors of the holding area. "Open it," Ellison commanded. Harlan's hands trembled violently as he fumbled with the heavy brass ring of keys. He jammed the key into the lock, twisting it with a loud clank, and pulled the heavy door open. The ammonia smell washed over them. Ellison pushed past Harlan, striding rapidly down the row of cages until he stopped dead in front of cell number 3. Behind the bars, Naomi Brooks sat calmly on the metal bench, her hands bound tightly behind her back. A vicious, dark purple bruise blooming across her left cheek, and dried blood caking her split lip. "Captain Brooks," Ellison breathed, absolute horror choking his words. Harlan felt the floor drop out from underneath him. The world spun. His lungs forgot how to process oxygen. He stared at the woman he had slapped, the woman he had unlawfully imprisoned, the woman he had mocked. Naomi slowly stood up, her gaze bypassing Ellison entirely to lock on to Harlan's pale, terrified face. "Deputy Chief," Naomi said smoothly, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the cell block. "I believe my introduction to the shift is slightly overdue." Absolute silence descended upon the holding block, heavy and suffocating like a wet wool blanket. Officer Grant Harlan stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant, as if his brain had simply short-circuited, trying to process the magnitude of his error. Beside him, Cole Brennan looked like he was about to vomit, his face taking on a sickly greenish pallor. The arrogant smirks, the swagger, the untouchable bravado, all of it had been incinerated in a single, catastrophic instant. "Unlock this cell immediately!" Deputy Chief Ellison roared, his voice shaking with a terrifying, unbridled fury. He spun around, grabbing Harlan by the collar of his uniform and violently shoving him toward the bars. "Unlock it now!" Harlan's hands shook so badly he dropped the ring of heavy iron keys onto the concrete floor. The metallic clatter echoed sharply. He dropped to his knees, scrambling to pick them up, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. It took him 3 agonizing attempts to fit the key into the lock of cell number 3. When the heavy iron door finally swung open, Ellison stepped forward, reaching out to guide Naomi out of the cage. "Captain Brooks, I am so deeply sorry," Ellison began, reaching behind her to inspect the handcuffs. "Let's get these off you." "Stop!" Naomi commanded, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. She didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hands still tightly bound behind her back. She looked at Ellison, her eyes cold and calculating. "Do not remove the cuffs yet, Marcus. I need internal affairs down here right now to photograph the restraints. I want the ratcheting documented. I want the lack of double-locking documented. I want the bruising on my wrists officially entered into evidence before they are removed." Ellison swallowed hard, nodding sharply. He turned to one of the IA detectives who had followed them down. "Get the camera, now!" Naomi then turned her attention to Harlan, who was still practically cowering near the cell door. "Officer Harlan, you failed to mention to the deputy chief that I was not the only person you were holding completely off the books today." Naomi nodded her head toward the dark corner of the cell. Lila Monroe sat huddled on the bench, trembling with fear, her eyes darting between the high-ranking officers and the men who had tormented her. "This is Lila Monroe," Naomi stated, her voice carrying a lethal precision. "She was abducted, and yes, I am using that legal term deliberately, by Officer Harlan hours ago. She has been held here without charge, without a phone call, and without record. Furthermore, she has been subjected to repeated sexual extortion by this officer in exchange for her undocumented release." Brennan let out a pathetic whimpering sound, taking a step backward as if trying to merge with the cinder block wall. Harlan tried to speak, but only a dry, raspy croak escaped his throat. "Lieutenant Raines!" Ellison barked to the shift commander standing at the end of the hall. "Get paramedics down here immediately to evaluate Ms. Monroe. Then get her a warm blanket, food, and have Detective Harper Quinn take her statement personally. Nobody in uniform goes near her." As the internal affairs detective arrived with a high-resolution digital camera, the flash illuminated the dark hallway. He meticulously photographed Naomi's bruised and bloody face, the torn fabric of her coat, and the deep, angry red indentations carved into her wrists by the over-tightened steel cuffs. Only after the detective gave a curt nod did Naomi allow Ellison to unlock the cuffs. She brought her arms forward, wincing slightly as the blood rushed painfully back into her numb fingers. She slowly massaged her wrists, her eyes never leaving Harlan's face. "Captain Brooks, I didn't know," Harlan stammered, his voice pathetic and weak. It was the desperate plea of a bully who had finally cornered a predator much larger than himself. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have treated me with respect, Naomi interrupted, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. But because you thought I was just a citizen, a black woman asking for accountability, you believed you had the right to brutalize me. You didn't assault me because of a misunderstanding, Harlan. You assaulted me because this is who you are. This is what you do when you think nobody with power is watching. She stopped inches from his face. Despite being a foot shorter than the burly patrolman, her presence completely dominated the space. She radiated an absolute, terrifying authority. "Your badge!" Naomi demanded, extending her right-hand palm up. Harlan stared at her hand, his lower lip trembling. "Captain, please. I have 20 years on the force." "Your badge and your weapon, Officer Harlan," Naomi repeated, her tone lowering to a dangerous whisper. "Hand them over now, or my next order will be to have the deputy chief physically disarm you and place you in handcuffs for the felony assault of a superior officer." With trembling hands, Harlan unpinned the silver shield from his chest and placed it into Naomi's palm. He then unbuckled his heavy leather duty belt, the holster containing his service weapon thudding heavily against the concrete floor. Naomi turned to Cole Brennan. "You too, Officer Brennan. Accessory to assault, falsifying a police narrative, unlawful detention, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Strip the belt." Brennan didn't argue. Tears streamed down his face as he hastily removed his badge and gun, dropping them next to Harlan's. "Internal Affairs," Naomi called out over her shoulder, tossing the 2 silver badges to the detectives. "Place these 2 men under arrest. Read them their rights. The real ones, not the fabricated version they use to terrorize civilians. Then process them strictly by the book. They are going into isolation cells at Central Booking. I want a full search of their lockers, their patrol vehicle, and their personal vehicles. We are pulling their entire jackets, every arrest, every complaint, every use of force report they have ever filed. Captain, you can't just end our lives like this over one mistake," Harlan cried out as the IA detectives moved in, grabbing his arms and violently forcing them behind his back. The loud click of handcuffs echoed in the hall, a poetic, brutal reversal of fate. "It wasn't one mistake," Naomi said coldly, wiping a small drop of dried blood from her chin. "It was a culture of rot, and as of this exact second, I am the cure." Naomi turned her back on the 2 disgraced men as they were hauled away, their protests echoing pitifully down the corridor. She looked at Deputy Chief Ellison, who was watching her with a mixture of profound respect and lingering shock. "Marcus," Naomi said, straightening her collar and adjusting the lapels of her trench coat. "I believe I have a roll call to address. Have Lieutenant Raines gather everyone back in the squad room. Nobody leaves. We are locking this precinct down." The house cleaning hadn't just begun. It had ignited with a nuclear blast, and Naomi Brooks was just getting started. Tension hung heavy in the stale air of the main squad room, thick enough to suffocate the remaining officers of the morning shift. Lieutenant Dominic Raines paced nervously near the front podium, his polished shoes scuffing against the cracked linoleum. It had been nearly 20 minutes since Deputy Chief Ellison had marched Grant Harlan and Cole Brennan out of the room, and the complete absence of information was breeding a palpable, toxic paranoia among the ranks. The usual boisterous laughter and crude jokes had evaporated, replaced by anxious whispers and darting glances. Everyone knew Harlan was untouchable. He was the ringleader, the undisputed alpha of the precinct's shadow hierarchy. If Internal Affairs had dragged him out, the entire house of cards was swaying in the wind. Footsteps echoed sharply from the administrative hallway. The heavy oak door swung open, and the room instantly snapped to a rigid, breathless attention. Deputy Chief Ellison entered first, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. But it was the woman stepping in right behind him who sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Naomi Brooks walked to the front of the squad room with the measured, predatory grace of a lioness claiming her territory. She had not cleaned her face. The vicious purple bruise left by Harlan's backhand swelled prominently across her left cheekbone. A streak of dried blood extended from the corner of her split lip down to her chin. Her charcoal trench coat bore the scuff marks of the holding cell wall, and her wrists, visibly exposed as she rested her hands on the wooden podium, were ringed with angry, dark red abrasions from the over-tightened steel cuffs. She stood there in total silence for 10 agonizing seconds. Her piercing dark eyes systematically scanned the faces of the 52 officers standing before her. She committed every flinch, every averted gaze, every pale complexion to memory. Sergeant Floyd Grayson, the desk sergeant who had aggressively ignored Mrs. Whitaker and happily watched Naomi get assaulted in the lobby, was standing in the second row. As Naomi's eyes locked onto his, all the color drained from his fleshy face. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the edge of a nearby desk to keep from collapsing. "For those of you who did not catch my name on the shift roster," Naomi began, her voice low, smooth, and laced with pure adamantium. "I am Captain Naomi Brooks. I am your new commanding officer, and as of this morning, I am your worst nightmare." A collective, barely suppressed shudder rippled through the ranks. "Earlier today, I walked into the front lobby of this building as a private citizen," Naomi continued, her words ringing out like hammer strikes against an anvil. "I witnessed an elderly woman being verbally abused and denied service by a sworn supervisor. I intervened. In response, Officer Grant Harlan and Officer Cole Brennan mocked me, physically assaulted me, illegally detained me, and locked me in a subterranean cage alongside a young woman they had abducted for the purpose of sexual extortion." Several officers gasped aloud. Lieutenant Raines closed his eyes, a look of profound nausea washing over his features. The sheer audacity of the crimes committed right under their noses was staggering, even for the 54th precinct. "They did this," Naomi said, stepping out from behind the podium so they could fully see her battered appearance, because they thought I was a nobody. They thought I was just a black woman who dared to speak up, a nuisance they could crush with absolute impunity. They operated under the assumption that this badge is a shield for predatory behavior rather than a covenant with the community. Naomi pointed a stiff finger directly at Sergeant Grayson. "Sergeant Grayson, step forward." Grayson trembled violently as he shuffled out of the ranks. "Captain, I didn't know who you were. I swear to God I didn't know." "That is exactly the point, Grayson," Naomi snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "You watched a citizen get backhanded across the face in your lobby, and you did absolutely nothing because you believed she had no power. You are a coward, you are complicit, and you are a disgrace to that uniform." Naomi turned to the 2 internal affairs detectives standing near the doorway. "Strip his badge and his weapon. Arrest him for dereliction of duty, accessory to felony assault, and official misconduct. Get him out of my sight." Grayson openly sobbed as the detectives moved in, relieving him of his gun belt and snapping handcuffs over his wrists. The sight of a veteran sergeant being perp-walked out of his own squad room sent a shockwave of pure terror through the remaining patrolmen. The message was clear. Tenure, rank, and the fabled blue wall of silence meant absolutely nothing to Naomi Brooks. "Take a good look around this room," Naomi commanded, her voice dropping back to that terrifyingly calm register. "The culture of the 54th precinct died this morning. It is over. The extortion, the skimming, the illegal stops, the intimidation. Every dirty secret you thought was buried is being dug up today." She turned to Lieutenant Rains, who snapped to attention, sweating profusely. "Lieutenant, lock the front doors. Suspend all patrol operations for this precinct immediately. Reroute all 911 calls in our sector to the 42nd and 61st precincts. Nobody in this room touches a computer, a file cabinet, or a cell phone. If I see a phone in your hand, you are fired on the spot." Rains swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain. The precinct is locked down." "Good," Naomi said, turning her back on the terrified officers and looking at Deputy Chief Ellison. "Because we aren't just doing administrative review anymore, Marcus. This entire building is now an active crime scene. Bring in the outside forensic tech teams. I want every hard drive cloned. I want every locker searched. We are tearing this place down to the studs." Hours bled into the late afternoon as the 54th precinct transformed from a functioning police station into a fortified crime scene. A specialized cybercrimes unit from downtown headquarters arrived in unmarked vans, hauling heavy Pelican cases full of forensic extraction equipment. They systematically disconnected every computer in the building, bypassing the local servers entirely to prevent any remote wiping of data. Naomi commandeered the captain's office, a spacious room that smelled faintly of stale cigars and cheap whiskey, the lingering ghosts of her disgraced predecessor. She refused to sit behind the massive mahogany desk, opting instead to stand over a large conference table that was rapidly filling up with evidence boxes, printed arrest logs, and seized duty weapons. Despite Deputy Chief Ellison's insistence that she visit the hospital for a proper medical evaluation, Naomi refused to leave the building. An EMT had patched her split lip and applied a cold compress to her cheek, but she waved away any further treatment. The pain kept her sharp. The pain fueled the righteous fire burning in her chest. "Captain," Detective Harper Quinn called out, stepping into the office with a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. Quinn was one of the few internal affairs investigators Naomi trusted implicitly, a sharp, relentless hound who never let a scent go cold. "We finished tossing Harlan's locker and his personal vehicle. You need to see this." Naomi looked up from a stack of heavily redacted use-of-force reports. "What did you find?" Quinn laid the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were a dozen clear evidence bags. Several contained thick wads of cash bound in rubber bands, easily totaling $50,000. But the most damning item was a small black leather notebook. Harlan wasn't just shaking down petty criminals and vulnerable women on his night shifts, Quinn explained, pointing to the notebook. He was running a highly organized protection racket. This ledger details weekly payouts from 3 different illegal gambling dens, a chop shop operating on the east side, and 2 mid-level narcotics distributors. He was charging them a tax to look the other way, and using his squad car to escort their shipments. Naomi flipped through the pages with a gloved hand, her eyes scanning the meticulous handwritten columns. Harlan was arrogant and brutal, but he clearly possessed a terrifyingly efficient mind for criminal enterprise. Who else is on the payroll? That's where it gets complicated, Quinn said, her expression grim. He uses initials and badge numbers, but they're coded. However, we did cross-reference some of the dates in the ledger with the precinct's arrest records. Whenever a dealer refused to pay Harlan's tax, Cole Brennan would suddenly discover a confidential informant tip, and that dealer's operation would get raided by the night shift squad. They were using the department's resources as their personal enforcement arm. Naomi felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The rot wasn't just a few bad apples. It was an entire orchard, poisoned to the roots. What about the missing grandson from this morning, David Whitaker? The old woman in the lobby said he hadn't come home. Quinn pulled a separate sheet of paper from the folder. I dug into that the second you mentioned it. David Whitaker isn't just a random missing person. He works as a mechanic at the exact same East Side chop shop listed in Harlan's ledger. Last night that shop was hit. Not by us, but by a rival crew. 2 people were killed. David barely escaped. The pieces began snapping together in Naomi's mind with terrifying clarity. Harlan wasn't just ignoring Mrs. Whitaker in the lobby out of cruelty. He and Brennan were actively trying to find the boy before he could talk. David Whitaker is a witness. He knows Harlan was protecting that shop. If David goes to the state police or the FBI, Harlan's entire empire crumbles. Exactly, Quinn nodded. And it explains why they abducted Lila Monroe. We interviewed her extensively. She told us Harlan kept asking her about her ex-boyfriend. Guess who her ex-boyfriend is? David Whitaker, Naomi breathed, her eyes widening slightly as the full scope of Harlan's depravity revealed itself. They grabbed the girl to use her as bait. They were going to leverage her to flush David out of hiding. And then they were going to silence them both. Naomi slammed her hand down on the table, the sharp crack echoing in the quiet office. The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering. Men sworn to protect the city were actively hunting down innocent civilians to cover up their own blood-soaked extortion ring. "Where is David Whitaker now?" Naomi demanded. "We don't know," Quinn admitted. "But if he survived the shootout at the chop shop, he's terrified. He's running, and he likely doesn't trust a single badge in this city." Naomi stared at the black ledger, her mind racing through tactical permutations. If Harlan had a crew inside the precinct loyal to him, someone else might still be hunting David. They needed to find the boy before the corrupt cops did, and they needed to break the encryption on Harlan's coded network. "Bring Sergeant Grayson into interrogation room A," Naomi ordered, her voice devoid of any warmth. "He sat at that front desk for 5 years. He knows every shadow in this building. He knows the codes. He knows who is loyal to Harlan." "Grayson is a seasoned cop, Captain," Quinn warned gently. "He knows the drill. He might lawyer up and stonewall us." Naomi touched the bruised, swollen skin of her cheek, a dark, merciless smile touching the corners of her mouth. "He can try," Naomi whispered softly. "But Grayson is a coward who just watched his god bleed. I'm going to walk into that room, and I am going to dismantle his entire life piece by piece until he begs me to let him talk." Fluorescent light buzzed with a sickening electrical hum inside interrogation room A. Sergeant Floyd Grayson sat bolted to the metal chair, his heavy arms shackled to the table ring. Sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his fleshy cheeks in thick, greasy trails. He flinched violently when the heavy steel door swung open. Naomi Brooks stepped into the room, moving with the terrifying, silent grace of an apex predator. She did not bring a notepad. She did not bring a junior detective to play good cop. She brought only Grant Harlan's black leather ledger, dropping it onto the metal table with a heavy, final thud. Naomi did not sit down. She paced slowly around the perimeter of the small, suffocating room, letting the silence stretch until Grayson looked like he was going to hyperventilate. "You have 22 years on the job, Grayson," Naomi said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You have a pension waiting for you. You have a wife named Diane and a daughter finishing her nursing degree at State University. I know this because I pulled your personnel file 5 minutes ago. Right now, you are looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for racketeering, accessory to kidnapping, and corruption under the RICO Act." Grayson sobbed a pathetic, wet sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Captain, you don't understand. Harlan, he runs everything. If I crossed him, he would have planted narcotics in my locker. He would have ruined my life." "He has already ruined your life," Naomi corrected sharply, stopping directly behind him and leaning down to whisper in his ear. "But I am the one who gets to decide where you spend the rest of it. You are going to translate every single initial in this ledger. And then you are going to tell me exactly where David Whitaker is hiding. Because if that boy dies tonight, I will personally charge you with felony murder." Grayson squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body trembling. "It's too late, Captain. Harlan got a tip a couple of hours ago. The kid is hiding out at the old Stanton rail yard on the west side. Harlan sent officers Vance Klein and Reed Dalton to handle it. They're off book, driving an unmarked black SUV. They're a hit squad, Captain. They aren't going to arrest him. They're going to put him in the dirt so he can never testify." Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded Naomi's veins. She spun away from Grayson and threw open the interrogation room door. Detective Harper Quinn and Deputy Chief Ellison were waiting in the hallway. "We have a designated hit squad active in the field," Naomi barked, her command presence taking absolute control. "Officers Klein and Dalton. They are heading to the Stanton rail yard to execute David Whitaker. Quinn, I want GPS tracking on their personal cell phones and any unmarked unit signed out of this precinct today. Ellison, mobilize the tactical response team. Nobody from the 54th rides with us. We use internal affairs and state troopers only." Within minutes, a convoy of heavily armored, unmarked tactical vehicles roared out of the headquarters' subterranean garage, their sirens cutting through the darkening city streets like screaming banshees. Naomi rode in the lead SUV, a heavy Kevlar vest strapped tightly over her charcoal trench coat. She checked the chamber of her service weapon, her face a mask of pure yielding resolve. The bruise on her cheek throbbed with every bump in the road, serving as a bitter reminder of the monster she was hunting. Rain began to pour again as the convoy smashed through the rusted chain-link gates of the abandoned Stanton rail yard. Towering rusted shipping containers and decaying train cars created a labyrinth of steel and shadows. Ahead, parked haphazardly near a collapsed warehouse, was a black SUV. "Move! Move! Move!" Naomi shouted over the radio. Searchlights from the tactical vehicles ignited, washing the muddy yard in blinding artificial daylight. Through the downpour, Naomi spotted them. Two men in dark civilian clothes with tactical holsters strapped to their thighs were dragging a battered, terrified young man toward the open trunk of their vehicle. David Whitaker was bleeding from a head wound, struggling weakly against the two corrupt cops. "Police, drop your weapons!" Deputy Chief Ellison bellowed through a digital bullhorn, stepping out of the tactical truck behind a heavily armed strike team. A dozen assault rifles instantly trained their laser sights onto Klein and Dalton's chests. Klein panicked, his hand instinctively dropping toward his holstered sidearm. "Don't you even breathe, Klein!" Naomi's voice sliced through the chaos. She stepped out from the cover of the lead vehicle, her own weapon drawn and leveled flawlessly at the rogue officer. The blinding searchlights illuminated the bruised, fiercely determined face of the black woman they all thought was just a powerless civilian. Dalton immediately threw his hands into the air, dropping to his knees in the mud. "I'm out! Don't shoot! I surrender!" Klein hesitated for one agonizing second, looking at the dozen laser dots painting his torso. The absolute certainty in Naomi's eyes told him everything he needed to know. She would drop him where he stood. Slowly, Klein raised his hands and fell to his knees. Tactical officers swarmed them instantly, ripping their weapons away and slamming them into the mud to cuff them. Naomi lowered her weapon and walked quickly toward David Whitaker, who had collapsed onto the wet gravel, sobbing hysterically. She knelt beside him in the pouring rain, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're safe now, David," Naomi said softly, the harsh edge of her command voice vanishing, replaced by profound empathy. "My name is Captain Brooks. We have Lila, and she is safe too. The men who hurt you are never going to wear a badge again." David looked up at her, his tears mixing with the rain. For the first time in days, the terror in his eyes finally broke, replaced by overwhelming relief. Naomi stood up, looking over the sprawling rail yard as the corrupt cops were hauled away in chains. The reign of terror at the 54th precinct was officially extinguished. Justice doesn't just happen. It has to be ruthlessly enforced. Power does not corrupt. It reveals who a person truly is. Naomi Brooks proved that true leadership means stepping directly into the darkest, most dangerous corners and dragging the monsters screaming into the light. Grant Harlan, Cole Brennan, and their corrupt crew received decades in federal prison, permanently shattering their reign of terror, while the 54th precinct became a shining example of actual community policing under Naomi's ironclad command. Did this explosive, real-life story of justice, immense courage, and sweet revenge keep you on the absolute edge of your seat? If you loved watching this corrupt empire crumble to ashes, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Drop a comment below telling us what you think of Captain Brooks's ultimate takedown.